years to make sure that there's an equity lens to all of this funding, and to make sure that that is the focus and the first thing, not that decisions are made somewhere else and equity is kind of trailing along at the end. So thank you for considering this, and good luck.
Thank you, sir. Mark Andrew. And if folks want to kind of get ready to go, then we have Michael Wilson.
Madam Chair, members, thank you very much. I'll be brief. I just wanted to make a couple of comments so the committee understands what the beginnings of Save Our Minneapolis Parks are. And the beginnings for this effort came about because of the realization that our parks were falling apart and that we've had an exquisite park system for most of the 134-year history of the Minneapolis parks, but they have fallen almost irreparably into disrepair. And the city and the park board have two historic opportunities. One is to provide the funding that is provided in the compromise that was forged by Council President Johnson and Councilmember Goodman. And the other is an acknowledgement that a long, acrimonious history between the Minneapolis City Council and the Mayor's Office and the Minneapolis Parks is coming to a close. This is a wonderful opportunity to collaborate and do something that's incredibly important and actually has historic significance. 20 years for a program of this type is not a long time in the overall scheme of things. With a park system that is as old as this one and has been neglected as long as this one, we need 20 years in order to get where we need to get. A 10-year program isn't going to work. A partially funded program isn't going to work. We need a fully funded program that is staged in a responsible way over a long period of time. The last thing I wanted to say is that we have worked very, very hard on the question of equity, and the Save Our Minneapolis Parks Committee has required three things to avoid a ballot initiative. The first thing is we got to have the money. The second thing is it's got to be reliable. And the third thing is that we need to address questions of equity that have been raised by several council members, including Councilmember Cano, Councilmember Gordon, Councilmember Glidden, Councilmember Johnson, and others, Councilmember Bender, others on the city council. Those issues are being addressed thanks to positive input from community advocates who have done wonders to establish priorities that will be focused clearly on equity. So
and if you could wrap up, please, Mr. Andrew.
Yep, we're done. And
time
appreciate your consideration of the Johnson-Goodman resolution. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. All right, Michael Wilson, and then Carlos Zingray, and then Shirley Heyer.
My name is Michael Wilson. I have lived in Minneapolis for 42 years. I currently live in the Cedar Isles Dean neighborhood, before that in the Lyndhurst neighborhood. And like many of you, perhaps, and many people in the room, I have raised all three of my kids in the Minneapolis parks, and I treasure the Minneapolis parks. I retired 8 years ago from the Minneapolis schools, and in my retirement, I've had the opportunity to participate in 3 park board CACs. I also write articles about the park board and other issues for my neighborhood newspaper, Hill and Lake Press. I've gotten to know several of the park board commissioners and a number of the park board staff. I've seen the extreme thoroughness with which they operate. And for me, when Superintendent Miller and her staff come up with a list of needs for the parks, I believe her because I've seen the thoroughness with which they work. I know the issue here is not whether the parks need more neighborhood parks need more funding. The issue is how much and how do we do it. I was here 3 weeks ago when the Johnson-Goodman amendment proposed ordinance was introduced, and also at the park board meeting that night, and the word historic was used again and again and again. I'm well aware, as all of you are and many people are, of the 133-year, this month, April 1883, the 133-year history of the park board and the city being at arm's length. I'm excited about the opportunity for the park board and the city to go arm in arm forward working on this issue. I would hope, having seen the work that the two senior members on the council, Councilmember Goodman and Johnson, have come up with, if they say it can be done, I believe them. I believe that it can be done. I would encourage you to seize this opportunity, not to study this to death or nickel and dime this to death, but go forward arm in arm with the park board, and let's do some good work for our Minneapolis neighborhood parks. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, Carlos Zingray, and then Shirley Heyer.
Good morning, Councilmember.
I'm sorry, I'm just getting a couple of other people ready, and then Miriam El-Rashidi. Okay, thank you.
Good morning, council members. My name is Carlos Shingre. I'm a resident of Minneapolis over 18 years. I have worked with many families in South Minneapolis, and also I used to work at the park board. I'm here to oppose the funding, the MPRB, and I'm giving you a few reasons. The Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, under the complacences of all the Caucasian Park Board commissioners and Superintendent Jay Miller, do not take allegations of racism, retaliation, nepotism, discrimination, and bullying happening in this institution. We have heard from people from the outside, and I want to see a park that is really not well funded, but unless the management is changed, unless people know what's going on in this institution, I won't approve this funding. Some of the things that I want to say is there was in payments of over $380,000 to a personal friend of Superintendent Miller. $8.6 million expended on a man-made pool, Weaver Pool. 6 MPRB employees sent to Germany on taxpayer dollars for 2 weeks. None of them were employees of color. Excessive bullying in the workplace, as stated by Commissioner Bradburn. Also, lack of people of color in management positions. They don't have ways to make decisions, and they are managed by Superintendent Miller. If you think of, we have people that don't have a voice in there that are earning over $130,000, and they don't have any voice that represents our communities. There is excessive use of policies, procedures on people of color, and limited opportunities to advance for people of color. I want to see the 2012 Minneapolis NAACP investigation of racism, discrimination, hostile work environment, and retaliation reopened. So some of the things that I would like to encourage to please take a look at this first. If we are talking here in equity, what kind of equity are we talking about? The park board has put Michelle Kellogg on charge of equity. She is the person that discriminated. She is the one that was correcting my Spanish. She doesn't even speak Spanish, but she was the one that's correcting my Spanish as when I was a community engagement. So all this department, what it does is has nepotism, discrimination, retaliation, bullying. Until those things are changed, I will definitely come here and support funding for the park. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Whoops, excuse me. Shirley Heyer, then Miriam El-Rashidi, and then Maria Pittner.
Thank you, Ms. Glidden, and I want to thank Alondra Cano, my city council member, who has kept us up to date with really late info and the importance of the city's neighborhood parks. This is a financial program to improve the neighborhood parks. My first request is that we have a real definition of what neighborhood park means. We pretty much know what the regional parks that are help funded by Hennepin County and other regional, like the Circle of Lakes. But we have a very poor, if non-existent, description of what a neighborhood park consists of. And I think, second, I would like people who talk about equity, racial inclusion, ethnic inclusion, and that includes whites as well as all the people of color. My neighborhood is 95% people of color. I've lived there since 1972. We in what used to be the Phillips neighborhood is now 4 neighborhoods. have worked since 1999 to improve, not just improve, but to even get facilities in our parks. And we have succeeded, and PV Park is the last one that needs major facilities. They have none except fields that I played on in softball 30 years ago. There were rocks and grass and stuff. The equity is not there in the process that was used to engage the communities. I went to a couple of meetings, 2 or 3 meetings last year when it started, and I went to 3 consecutive ones recently, primarily white people on the CAC committee, and one young man spoke from the Hope area of West Phillips West and said all the people of color have left because we're not included, we're not heard. And it was quite obvious. And second, there is no set of priorities of what exists in the parks now and what needs to be improved immediately to save buildings and what needs to be added brand new, like PV Park, which has been studied and has plans from 2 different groups for at least 6 years. And the money is not enough for maintaining what needs to be improved. It's not enough to add park facilities in neighborhoods that haven't had them, basically, for a long, long time. Not 10 years, not 20, 30, and 40 years. And as just one more money, we are not getting answers as to any money, any list of priorities of what's going to be done first, second, third, and fourth. There's no recognition of the fact that the residents, with a few park officials, state legislators, got East Phillips Park built primarily on a true combination of equity and participation. And if
you could start to the wrap up.
Yeah. So I'm opposed to this referendum. I will fight against it until all those questions are done. Take a year to set priorities, which park gets done, and which a whole 20-year program so we know what's going on and how much money is to be required and how it's going to be spent and how the park system. This previous gentleman was absolutely right on about management and staff, lack of training for upgrading employees' positions. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Miriam El-Rashadi, then Maria Pittner, then Liz Pitts-Cartwright, and then Dennis Larson. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. My name is Miriam El-Rashidi, and I am a clinical law fellow at for the Community Justice Project at the University of St. Thomas School of Law. I'm here today to request that you deny the Park Board's request for additional funding. We can all agree that we want our parks to be clean, safe, and appealing. However, recently, our office was contacted by former employees of the Park Board regarding their discriminatory practices and how they allegedly treat people of color far differently than their white counterparts. There have been reports dated from 2001 that support these claims and show that people of color are treated far differently than their white counterparts. Additionally, some of the concerns that Park Board employees have raised include that the Park Board is not hiring people of color at equitable rates, that African Americans are disciplined, suspended, and terminated at disproportionate rates, and African Americans and people of color are not being promoted and retained at equitable rates. The Park Board has been on notice for many years and are aware of these claims and have not done an adequate job remedying this problem. We have approached the Park Board recently about the need to address these concerns. In the meantime, we would ask that you deny the request for additional funding until these problems are resolved. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Just lost my sheet. Maria Pittner, and then Liz Pitts-Cartwright, then Dennis Larson.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Maria Pittner. I'm a law student at the University of St. Thomas and a member of the Community Justice Project. I, along with partner, worked to investigate some of the allegations of racial disparities in the Park Board, and what I found was alarming. I reaffirm the concerns brought to by Ms. El-Rashidi. I urge the Park Board, our community as a whole, to ask for more information, to understand and to know that the park board and the communities, the parks that we're providing are not only just places for our diverse community to go out and play and enjoy the community, but also to know that they have an opportunity, equal opportunity in that community as they flourish and grow. Not that they will be denied jobs, not that they will be discriminated against as they continue up those ranks, but to instill and perpetuate equality in all its forms. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Dennis Larson? Did I do everybody else? Or is this Liz Cartwright? I lost my place. I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's me. Good morning, everyone. My name is Liz Pitts-Cartwright. I'm here to speak out against this bill. I'm a law student at the University of St. Thomas. This semester, I've been a certified student attorney in the Community Justice Project Clinic at St. Thomas, along with Ms. Pittner, and we are led by Ms. El-Rashidi. Our assignment and main focus at the clinic was to investigate allegations of disparate treatment of minorities at the Minneapolis Park Board. Throughout the countless hours that we spent doing so, we discovered horrific treatment of minorities by the Park Board. Indeed, many reports by outside contractors have indicated that treatment of minorities by the Park Board is a huge problem, and yet the Park Board has failed to take any measurable steps to correct this. The Park Board wastes taxpayer dollars in acting out these abuses, and then further wastes taxpayer dollars by attempting to fend off and by litigating discrimination complaints. The Park Board has proven time and time again that it does not manage taxpayer dollars appropriately. It uses them to further racism. They should not be given any more additional funding until they can prove that they can treat all employees with dignity and that they have taken concrete steps to address the problems that have been brought forward to them time and time again. Thank you.
Thank you. Dennis Larson, and then I just want to note I don't have anyone else who has signed up, and if you want to bring me anybody else who's signed up, and but just a note, if anybody else would like to speak who has not signed up, I would invite you to sign up, and we're here to hear from you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dennis Larson. I'm just here to talk about I think the inner city should get, the same quality building equipment and funding as the suburbs. Should, work inside the city than outside, and then go outside. And how can you give money to enhance buildings and they don't give equal quality to their staff? These organizations should focus in the issue with equality, racism, discrimination, and have people to work in a non-hostile environment. I hope it is denied, but please address all these issues we said today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have Jeremiah Bay, and then Carol Pass, and then anybody else who would like to speak. Yes, sir.
Hello, thank you for having me. I do want to reiterate what people have been saying about making sure that we address equity issues as we move forward with this. I think that there's been a lot said about making sure that people are committed to equity, but I think that their community members are articulate in what they need. We've seen some of that today. And so I just want to be on record as affirming that equity does need to be a major part of what happens with the parks moving forward. I don't think I'm in support of the Johnson Goodman plan. I've tried to read up as much as I can on it. I read over it, and I can't really see any real substance to it. And I definitely don't see any real substantive equity language in it. So just wanted to have that on record, and thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Carol Pass, and then I have one more person who has signed in, George. Who's that?
Hi, thanks, council members. My name is Carol Pass. I live in East Phillips, and
the mic will pick you up without having to do too much, just so you know.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
I don't have to swallow it in order to be heard.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I just want to mention the equity issue, but aside from that, along with the equity issue, I know when we started working toward our park and we got our $3.5 million, first $3.5 million to put the park center in, the park board actually was voting on whether or not they would accept it. I was astonished. They said that they didn't have staffing to do another park, and and they were and I walked in the door when they were actually voting on this, and I sort of, none of the same commissioners are there except a few, but I was astounded. Now that park is probably the most heavily used in the city. It is swamped with youth, and it's just got people all over the place. Thank God they didn't do that. I want to say that you know, the area around Phillips has, at last count, 7,016 young people under 18. It has about 20,000 people. That's about more than a third, or about less than a third, I guess. But anyway, that's more children than Linden Hills, Powderhorn, East Calhoun, Kenwood, and Kingfield combined. It has a greater level of poverty than all of those combined. Twice as many of the children in Phillips live in poverty as opposed to the total number of children in Powderhorn. So I'm looking at, what do our parks really do? They do more than just provide equity and justice and et cetera. They control crime. People have forgotten this long ago study by R.T. Ryback when he opened the parks for longer hours in North Minneapolis when we had a horrible wave of crime. And believe it or not, it went down. It went down that summer almost right away. Kids were doing something useful. They weren't stealing cars. They were doing other things. It's entertaining to steal cars. I mean, it really is. I know a lot of young people in our neighborhood, and they just find it fascinating to break it open and get it going. And their use of electronics is used, their skills are put to use. I also think that our park serves almost as family for kids that are homeless or kids that have troubled families. We have park staff that are almost like parents for these kids. I can see why extending the hours helps. We also we provide educational needs that these families don't know how to use computers. This is their first exposure. Oftentimes, we do financial literacy, we do computer literacy. These features aren't really essential to, say, East Calhoun or some of the other Kenwood and et cetera, because the parents provide those things. They also take their kids on vacations. Our kids never get out of the neighborhood at all. Not at all. Kids can live there until they're 12 years old, and they've never gone up north, never gone on a venture any place to a different culture, et cetera.
And as Ms. Paz, if you want to kind of get to... So
my point is, without some sort of recognition of these needs in the poorer and more ethnic neighborhoods, I want to see that in the bill. I want to see it in there, written in black and white, and a recognition of the needs of these parks, particularly the crime issue. We need help with that, and I know from the facts that this is it's more than equity; it's survival for us. So,
thank you, ma'am. George Puzak, and then that is the last person that I've had actually sign up. And if you would like to speak, we will take more speakers. I would like you to please sign up.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is George Puzak. I'm a lifelong resident of Minneapolis. I'm a former commissioner on the park board back 20 years ago. The unrest in our community today is somewhat similar to what was going on in the 1960s. Today, our neighborhood parks are the social, emotional, and recreational touchstones for our local community. It is very important that we pass the Johnson-Goodman Ordinance for 20 years to rebuild our neighborhood park system. I'd like to give you a couple of examples when I was a kid in the parks. When I was in grade school, I rode my bike to the neighborhood park, Luxton Park, and a teenager who was very much unlike me grabbed my bicycle and lifted it up one hand like this and dropped it in front of everybody. And when the laughter stopped, some of the other kids, unlike me, said, "Hey, Ricky, that's wrong, man. You shouldn't be doing that." 20 years later, playing in an adult softball league, I was the only white guy on a team, and I got stuck off in right field. Edward, one of my teammates, said, "Hey, George, I know how you feel. You can take my position over here, and I'll play right field." And to this day, those relationships I built in the parks with my peers and other adults have had a lasting impression on me that I've tried to pass on to my children. I think it's very important that we rebuild our neighborhood parks. This is not about the park board or the city council. It's about the neighborhood park infrastructure in our city. Please pass the Johnson-Goodman ordinance as written or as close to it as possible and make this a 20-year plan to rebuild our parks. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I know there was at least one other speaker.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Jake Verdon. I'm an organizer on the Parks and Power campaign, which was born at Hope Community out of some of the struggles in the Phillips neighborhood that were mentioned earlier. We work for racial justice in Minneapolis parks, and for us, it means two things. We do popular education in the parks, truth-telling, training, racial justice, literacy, and we also look at the park board as a policy arena and as a place for low-income people and people of color to organize and participate and take public leadership. So I just want to acknowledge the comments that were made about the racial inequity and the racial injustice in the park board. We know that that's true, and it's not a secret to anybody. It shouldn't be. Go to any CAC meeting. It's a mostly white room. I also want to acknowledge that the park board is starting to move, and to cut the funding right now and to close the conversation is not the way to go. I don't think. We've been doing a lot of work, and I've seen the initial criteria for how this funding could be spent, and it's the most race-conscious language that the park board has probably ever used. I think there's a lot of potential there. I also heard something last night at Councilwoman Glidden's forum that gave me pause, and it said that in both plans written by the mayor and the city council people, the money is less guaranteed. So with all the people speaking here, one thing we can all agree on is the parks are a huge asset. So to me, a referendum makes sense because it pushes it back to the people. And I'd like to see people take Councilwoman Cano's lead and bring it to your constituency, bring up the equity issues. I heard from folks, I did a lot of listening sessions with the Rec Quest, which is an initiative that we partnered with the park board on last summer. And I had a lot of concerns about gentrification. People can see this is a boom period. So this is about property taxes, right? Like the value in the city is rising. So the park board should get a fair share of that. And I feel like really creating a robust debate is a chance to create some models of public investment that don't displace, that actually build equity. I just think there's a lot of potential in a potential referendum. Yeah, a lot of potential. I also just want to say I do this work because I'm from Northeast Minneapolis. I grew up at Botno Park, first generation out of apartheid. We saw racial violence in our parks. So I do want to see the money. Folks like Coach Tate, people who are out here really doing the work, I think it would be a shame if what came out of this was not the resources to keep the parks strong and healthy. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak today? Anyone else? All right, then what I'm going to do is we will continue this public hearing and I will ask if we'll kind of return to discussion or any comments that council members would like to make. Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I've been talking to a lot of my community residents about this proposal and this issue. And similarly, we've been working a lot on the South Side master plan and sort of the improvements that are hoping to be done through that process for South Minneapolis parks. And so through that process and that engagement, it's been really challenging to ensure that people of color, bilingual communities, and Indigenous communities are engaged and are a part of the process. And so for me, when we're discussing these issues of funding, as I've stated publicly multiple times, it's really important to ensure that we codify and that we sear a racial equity framework into the funding mechanisms that are going to be moving forward for the parks. I think a lot of people agree that we need to support our parks, and I think that ensuring that those funding sources come from a sustainable and forward-looking approach is very important, and this is why I'm really interested in working with the mayor, and thank Councilmember Quincy for providing leadership in this direction. I would like to make sure that we provide leadership in the racial equity direction. I've been talking to folks who have been involved in the city council before our cohort got here, and everyone agrees that this is one of the first times that us as policymakers are really digging down to figure out these issues. And so it takes a little bit more work and it takes a little bit more time to really finesse and roll out these very important initiatives that have to deal with ensuring that we close the racial disparities that we face as a city and that unfortunately we are leading in the nation. And so I want to encourage us to really think about how we can build a racial equity framework into the funding mechanisms that will be put in place to support our parks. There is no doubt that we need to support our parks, and we have very beautiful green space in Minneapolis. But we always have the but, which is parks in the areas of our city that are considered racially concentrated areas of poverty, which me and my children go to regularly. And you see the disinvestment. You don't have to do a lot of research. You don't have to do a lot of digging to feel what the disinvestment looks like. And so I really want to make sure that the community who has come here today to talk about racial equity funding, that their voice is elevated in this process, and that we are working really hard to ensure that these investments that we're hoping to make are prioritized and will go to our neighborhood parks, that we take heed to the call to action from a lot of the work that the Parks and Power folks have put forward, who have been working on PV Park, for example, for more than 10 years, as far as I can recall. And I think it's really important for us to, as a council body to do good by our people and ensure that we are being really intentional and really publicly committed in capturing these racial equity funding mechanisms that we need to, I believe, have at the table and have firmly and squarely be a part of the funding conversations, whether it's in the language of the ordinance or the language of the resolution or whatever mechanism we end up deciding to move forward to help advance and support and strengthen the racial equity work that I'm hearing is already happening at the parks. I don't know the full details of those plans. I'm trying to get more information. I know there's a meeting on April 20th where the park leaders and commissioners will be engaging around this topic. I plan to be at that meeting, but I think that in order to really help provide some collective impact, we should align our work with the parks work by codifying a commitment to racial equity funding in the work that we're doing.
Thank you. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate very much everyone who's contacted me about this issue. I'm one of the council members who hasn't given my public support to any specific proposal, but I've been very consistent in what I've said about this issue from the beginning, which is that I support funding parks. I just want to make sure that we are doing so in a fiscally responsible way that right sizes our investment to all of the other needs that we have in our city. I've been concerned because of what I've heard from my constituents in recent years about property tax increases in my ward, about a large one-time levy increase. And so I have been favoring a proposal that would phase in funding over time. The mayor's proposal, for example, has a incremental levy increase because it would rely on bonding in the early years. And I think that that's a better, more fiscally responsible approach that will have less impact on my constituents. I am very supportive of the work that Councilmember Canos and others are speaking about related to racial equity. I think it would be irresponsible for us to adopt any resolution that didn't at least lay out a process by which we would work with the park board to ensure that these investments are equitably distributed. And if there is something ready before we vote, I would obviously review and look to support that. But if not, I would at least hope that we could get to a process that we can agree on with the park board. I have been unwilling to support any proposal that doesn't identify funding sources. I can't imagine that being a controversial position. The park board's own resolution said by voting yes on this ballot question, you are voting for a property tax increase. So I have been surprised by the number of my colleagues who have asserted, at least to me in private, that they think we can fund this without raising property taxes or cutting spending. And I think we're getting to a point where we have our professional staff engaged in identifying funding sources. I was very grateful to my colleagues that supported a staff direction that I made at Ways and Means so that we will have a report on options for funding sources at our next Ways and Means committee from our finance staff. So I just wanted to be clear, since I'm getting so many contacts about this, my position, and I look forward to us all working together to bring this to a resolution.
Thank you. Councilmember Andrew Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to speak for a minute on the racial equity issues that are brought up today. I think clearly it's very important. It was actually a question I brought up when this was originally put to us, and that Superintendent Miller was able to talk about their process and their work to prioritize the funding. And obviously, I've been concerned as well hearing from folks representing former park board employees. And so, I'm glad that you're advocating for workers who feel that there's been some sort of injustice with them. And I look forward to hearing updates on that. But when it comes to codifying a commitment to racial equity funding and how the council really interfaces with that, I'm absolutely open if there's an agreement here that's struck between the park board and the city on this. My concern is that the park board is also an independent board that is separate from the city council, that is elected by the same constituents. And so if constituents and members of the city say, hey, the park board isn't doing an adequate job of X, Y, or Z, I hope they would take that up with their park board members and obviously use the opportunity of our civic duty to hold them accountable for progress in these measures. Where I get concerned is when we try to tie too many things to this funding, it to me crosses a line at some point over the park board's independence. I have my disagreements with the park board as well on a few different things, and we've talked about those, but I'm not going to hold hostage funding for our parks, which is dearly, dearly needed. We see our park buildings falling apart, literally rain coming in through the roof of my local park. And while it would be nice to get a number of different things, maybe some more movement on them, I think we have to recognize that, look, there's a serious need here. And the park board is, as people have said, addressing racial equity. And I hope we all hold them accountable to that and watch the progress that they make in that. But at the same time, I think we can't jeopardize the need for this funding across the entire park system on that. So I would urge caution with any sort of modifications to language. I would absolutely consider them, and especially I'd be happy if the park board would be open to them and work with council members with that concern in order to put language in there. But at the end of the day, first and foremost, I think we need to properly fund our parks. And I agree with my colleagues as well. We need to properly fund our roads too. But certainly this is a huge need, and I'm committed to closing this gap for our parks.
Thank you. Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. First off, I appreciate Councilmember Johnson's sentiment regarding the independent jurisdiction of the Park Board, and I also appreciate Councilmember Cano's sentiment regarding the importance of equity. I will say that the equity conversation, especially if it's included in some end ordinance, can't just be a bunch of catchphrases. It can't be, talking about collective and community-based collaboration and just tackling injustices and engaging all major stakeholders. We actually have to be clear on what we're doing, because otherwise it's just a bunch of grandstanding. If we're going to do the equity piece, it requires work. It requires sitting down, figuring out the numbers, where those monies are allocated, and those are difficult decisions that require a whole lot of work. So if we're going to talk about it, I think we need to also be doing the work to get it done.
Councilmember Reich.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, and I really appreciate the conversation today. We look at numbers and spreadsheets and see need and try to allocate resources that look long-term, and that's a great exercise with my colleagues and our partners in the other jurisdictions and all the staff that do all the preparatory work. But it's also good to hear from the public too, and to see how they view the different issues and how they relate to each other. As the transportation dude or guy, more formally the chair of the Transportation Public Works Committee, we recently had a report that really did look at the long-term generational needs of our system, and that wasn't intended to be an academic exercise where, okay, now we know that and we sort of table it. It was actually the first step, a very significant step in seeing what our challenges are and then taking subsequent steps to meet those needs and challenges. And of course, the details, the how you ramp it up, and all the different sort of components of meeting those needs over a long-term period, starting now with what we know and moving forward, that's underway. And it's certainly in parallel with any other conversation, be it conversations about the budget for the Park and Rec, conversations about economic development, conversations about our police and fire. I mean, we always have this holistic responsibility. Now, of course, we have these elevated conversations regarding parks and with roads because they're just so fundamentally appreciated and needed and expected. And because of that importance and the scale of the need that we've seen before us, those are big numbers, those are a lot of zeros. We have this conversation that's very fulsome and very passionate from all sectors of the city that I see today, and the people that contact me aren't just from my ward, they're from around the whole city, because we see this as fundamental to what Minneapolis really is. And so I assure you that the work that we're going to do will not be in isolation. There will certainly be a looking at and a reckoning of the resources that will be allocated ultimately for our needs for Park and Rec and for roads. It won't be done in isolation, or I certainly wouldn't be participating in it. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Warsame.
Thank you, Vice President Glidden. I just wanted to thank everybody who showed up, members of the community who came here in support of our parks. And I just wanted to talk about my own personal experience. I'm a homeowner and I live in Cedar Riverside, right next to Augsburg College. And we have Matthews Park right next to us, which is the oldest park in the city of Minneapolis. And we also have Curry Park in Cedar Riverside. And when you see Curry Park in the summers and you have hundreds and hundreds of families, of elders, of children using that park, you see how vital that little green space is to the community, especially community from an immigrant community from a warm climate, an immigrant community whose elders are stuck in the housing complex in Cedar Riverside. Curry Park is the most important space in our neighborhood. And we have Brian Coyle Center, and Brian Coyle Center is falling apart. We need resources for Curry Park. We just had a small soccer field, and that small soccer field is probably the most used soccer field in the city of Minneapolis. So you see how vital the park is to us, to our children, to our community, to our elders. And that goes for PV Park. And I have discussions with the park board about PV Park, about the safety of our residents that use PV Park, and how much investment that needs to go to PV Park. And there needs to be a lot of investment in our neighborhood parks. So I think the argument that we are pitting equity and people of color against the park system and finding resources for the park system, I think that argument is ridiculous. And I think that the people who will benefit from investment in the parks will be people of color, people like myself and my family that live in Cedar Riverside, that use Curry Park and all the other parks in the city of Minneapolis. So I would like my colleagues to support finding a way, finding a solution, and set aside any historical issues that were there between the park board and the city of Minneapolis. I think that's irrelevant, and we should set aside politics and look at the importance of the park system to the city of Minneapolis. Because what is Minneapolis? It's a city of water and parks. And I think we need to protect both our water and our parks. Otherwise, Minneapolis will not be what the city is today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I wanted to just respond a little bit to a few of the things that I've heard from my colleagues today. First of all, Councilmember Warsame, thank you for bringing up the role of elders in our community. I often forget about our previous mayor, Ryback's Silver Tsunami framework, and how we do really need to figure out not only programming for young people, but programming for the elders in our community, which are quickly rising to higher numbers. I do want to share that in the work that I've been doing with my constituents and with other people around the parks issue, there's been a conversation that's coming out about how can we possibly fund parks more when our neighborhood kids don't have access to things like the soccer fields or the baseball fields. And so the issue here is coming out as a lot of soccer groups from not the Minneapolis area renting out the soccer fields consistently and over time, to the point where kids in the neighborhood can't just grab a soccer ball and come play with their friends. It's become a very competitive, and perhaps there's a financial component to this about how much money is being incurred by the parks by renting out the soccer fields. And so I just want to point out that we will have to figure out a way that, at least from my perspective, that the space at our parks is being used in a way that residents of the area can access them. If they're just kids in the neighborhood who want to be able to go outside and run around and play and not have to be a part of a highly structured fee-based soccer program, or similarly with the baseball fields. And so there seems to be a little bit of a lack of information about how are decisions made in terms of who gets access to the soccer fields and when, who gets access to the baseball fields and when. What if we have folks who now want to start playing other games like lacrosse and so forth. So that's one point of information I want to put on the table. I wanted to respond a little bit to Councilmember Andrew Johnson's points about this holding hostage approach. And I really want us to flip the script on that type of thinking. I think that it's important for us to see the work that we're doing on a proactive level on addressing racial equity through this funding mechanism, not as punitive, but as helpful. And so I want us to stop thinking about racial equity as a type of punishment that we all have to drag ourselves through. This is actually a really exciting moment in time where we can be helpful, produce outcomes, help our communities in ways that we have not been able to do before. And so I want to encourage us to step up to the challenge and to be proactive about how we codify and bake racial equity into the bones of this park funding proposal, because I would rather be here 5 years from now, hopefully I'm here 5 years from now, saying, yes, we did it, instead of, no, we missed our opportunity. I don't want to be saying that. I do not want to be a policymaker saying we missed our opportunity in racial equity. That song is old and tired, and I don't want to sing it. Lastly, to Councilmember Jacob Fry's points around, are we going to get down to do the work, and what tools do we have? I just want to express that we do have a very important tool already in place through the Met Council, which is the Racially Concentrated Areas of Poverty map, which has provided us with a lot of research and information about what areas of our city are the most challenged when it comes to the cumulative impacts of social vulnerabilities. And so that is a piece of information I've already shared with the superintendent of the parks, Jean Miller, who I know is here today. And I've asked them to please provide us a list of all the neighborhood parks that are in the RCAP zones, so we can start analyzing the type of funding that has gone behind these parks, and we can start thinking about some of the concrete solutions that we want to put on the table. So I just want folks to remember that we do have some very important tools already at our disposal that can help us advance and quickly get to some pragmatic solutions on these issues.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I thought I was getting at the end of the stack when I signed in for this, but because I didn't want us to end the discussion without at least acknowledging that in the course of the public hearing, we heard some pretty shocking and disturbing things, or that I did, that I wasn't expecting. So I heard from one person who talked about the number of programs at a Southwest Park compared to a North Park, and a disparity there. I heard from a former employee of the parks talking about some personal experiences and then relationships that he had that made him alarmed and very concerned about some unfair practices. And then I heard from a university law student group, law clinic, looking at who had apparently had data about promotions and hirings and some disturbing trends. So those things were pretty alarming to me, and shows me that there's some stuff going on here, and also showed me, well, people were looking at parks more carefully than we have before. Some people are having maybe more courage than they ever had before to speak up about some of these things. And we actually might have a really good opportunity here in the next couple weeks as we're moving forward, solving this funding, financing these problems, to make some commitments ourselves as a council and as a park commission and as a community to at least find out about these, develop a plan to address some of these concerns. And I know that's a lot more work that gets attached to this, but I think if we don't in the next couple weeks dig into these a little bit more and set us on a course for correcting things that might be wrong, we'll really miss an opportunity here And so I say, as we're figuring out the funding gap, let's also figure out how we can show ourselves how we're going to do better in those areas if the problems are really as deep and significant as I was getting a sense they might be.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to clear up a couple of incorrect statements that have been made throughout the public hearing process. There is a definition of neighborhood